intended to point to event. Breakcounts might still suggest the axiomatic counts of representation, which would be the same counts of the one or many. But rather than those counts, the many terms of parts, or a count, the one term of totality, in distinction to such break counting, it's intended to point to breaking count as break count, hence as event. But how this breaking count, break count as event, is ontic, is key to what I intend to discuss. To expand the distinction, one might say, as soon as we take event as a, or the event, that this there is pertains to the differentiation of the actionized. That, arguably, solely of the becoming as the given of the transcendental constituted. Whereas, when we insist on just taking event as event, what Deleuze calls pure becoming or dark precursor or vistiction critically still pertains to this event. And it's this event, one might say, quasi-event rather than its event, as its reinstates a belonging or containment, that as virtual differentiation, which though real, ontic, and not abstract, might also be distinguished as supernatural or transubstantiation. So this will be returned to what follows. So here I'm drawing upon the distinction of virtual and actual as set out in the work of Gilles Deleuze. So my presentation is directed towards discussing and questioning how critically the rejection of axiomatic methods and frameworks is at play across both contemporary arts and sciences, and what is at stake in this. And via questions arising from readings of Leibniz texts that pertain to notions of event in contemporary arts and sciences philosophy. So I'll just commence with some basic definitions. I know sorry, switch off if that's too basic, this is too basic. So on the axiom. So an axiom, as per the dictionary, is a self-evident truth. A universally received principle, a postulate, assumption, and the Greek etymology is given as to think worth, to take for granted, worthy. And so more technically specific, as per the glossary of terms in Lyotard and Parisi's book, Contagious Architecture, Computation, Aesthetics and Space, we have axiom as a mathematical postulate based on immediate evidence or a formal system that constitutes an implicit definition of that system without necessary evidence. So, firstly then, with the axiom, it's those familiar old but yet contemporary hornets that confront us. It's the problematics of identity, unity and truth. More precisely, truth as unity and unity as identity. The axiom, as that of a self-evident truth, therefore, is that reinforcing a notion of truth that is condemned to the strictures of that which is proof of or provided by the I. Right, the axiom is that of a self-evident truth. Right, the axiom, as that of a self-evident truth, therefore, is that reinforcing a notion of truth that is condemned to the strictures of that which is proof of or provided by identity. That the axiomatic representation therefore grounds truth as identity, as essence. So in contrast, it can be argued that the rejection of axiomatic methods and frameworks at play in contemporary sciences and arts has to do with the rejection of this kind of truth, and this indicates what's at stake. The pitfall, still of merely departing from absolutism only to arrive at relativism, versus instead truth, which yet is, though somehow elsewise, rather than simply somehow otherwise. So, just going to divert en route to Lyotard, really. But I'm just going to compare Karl Popper on the myth of the framework and Paul Feyerabend on anything goes. So so rationalism and relativism. So in chapter 2, firstly, to elaborate with regard to, in chapter 2 of the myth of the framework in defence of science and materiality, based on first prepared in 1965, Popper diagnoses the myth of the framework as the doctrine that one cannot rationally discuss anything that is fundamental, or that a rational discussion of principles is possible, and says this doctrine is logically an outcome of a mistaken view that all rational discussions start from some principles, or as they often called axioms, which in turn must be accepted dogmatically if we wish to avoid an infinite regress. A regress due to the alleged fact that when rationally discussing the validity of our principles, we must again appeal to principles of axioms. But Popper argues instead that in the natural sciences, there is rational critical discussion, which does not seek to prove or justify, or to establish a theory, least of all by deriving it from some higher premises, but which tries to test the theory under the discussion of finding out whether its logical consequences are all acceptable, or whether it has perhaps some undesirable consequences. He argues that this is the mistaken method of criticising that asks, how can we establish or justify a thesis or a theory that results in dogmatism, or the relativistic doctrine of rationally incommensurable frameworks, whereas he argues the correct method of critical discussion starts from the question, what are the consequences of our thesis or our theory? Are they all acceptable to us? For Popper, whilst we are, as he says, conscious of the fallibility, for Popper, while we are, as he says, conscious of the fallibility of these correct methods, we can, so he says conscious of the fallibility, but he calls the methods correct. He also thinks we can still improve theories by, so it's funny from improving to improving, so it's still in that register. The theories by the correct method, which he says tries to replace all our theories by better ones. So, anyway, this is what's problematic. Popper distinguishes the aim of this method from that of the attack of still only producing a model of self-justification. He defends himself by saying it's as instead aiming for the critical transcendence of a framework. So he was still in the intention of transcendence. But the aim of transcendence clearly still remains here, and with it the axiomatics of identity potentially remain reinstalled or untouched. So instead, how does failure of end fare? In chapter 1 against method, he states that there is only one principle that can be defended under all circumstances and in all stages of human development. It is the principle of anything goes. But later, in the postscript on relativism, 1993, we find, I say that relativism gives an excellent account of the relation between dogmatic worldviews, but it's only the first step towards an understanding of life traditions. And relativism is as much a chimera as absolutism, the idea that there exists an absolute truth. Here he also cites some of his early work since the first publication with regard to how traditions interact in order to support it against traditional versions of relativism for their abstraction, where there were rational. I've lost track of the time, so I don't know just
I will do crazy
So he argues that rational exchange promises respect only in the framework of a rational debate, while an open exchange has no organon, that means method of investigation, but it may invent one. And he says there is no logic, though new forms of logic may emerge in its course. But also, there is Fairbairn's following key emphasis. He says, in sum, an open exchange is part of an as yet unspecified and unspecifiable practice. We might compare his argument in chapter 1, where it says the only principle that does not inhibit process is anything goes. And his concluding remark in postscript, where he refers to what he calls cosmological and ontological relativism, and states that this is the relativism because the type of reality encountered depends on the approach taken. Not every approach succeeds, though. He also says in nature as work of art, I argue that the world of modern science, and not only the description of this world, is an artwork constructed by generations of artisans and scientists. That's interesting now. However, I would say that this version of relativism may still remain that which casts a shadow in that its inventions still relate to truth as that of transcendental entities rather than immanence without an entity. Even with this revised cosmological relativism, the problem remains still that these admittedly less certain and less distinct objects and subjects, though invented rather than discovered, are still those based on the axiomatics of identity. They merely go from measurable fact discovered of self-evident truth to the experimental fact invented self-evident truth. With these arguments by Popper and Feyerabend, we are still somewhat remote from arriving critically at incommensurable and non-dialectical truth, and to which count one is not predisposable. In Lyotard's words, wanting to promote oneself as partisan of the event, or to predispose oneself to the event, is still an ethical delusion. Secondly, to elaborate with regard to the assertion, but truth yet is, we should also acknowledge here, then, that the collapse of the representation of axiomatic truth as that based on the principle of identity, but also with this delicate shift from the A count of the somewhat otherwise to quasi-event, has already been argued, and most notably by work by Heidegger, Deleuze, Lyotard, Goode, amongst others. Truth yet is. It is the import of this displacement that is at stake, how truth there is unfounded. It's also such issues, and above all such truth, that I see as key to those working in the contemporary movement of ana-philosophy by the important key figure and work of Johnny Goode on ana and ana-materialism and truth games, and in distinction, this philosophical distinction, I think, to other areas of work on object-oriented philosophy and non-philosophy. But I'm going to, I don't think it's time for us, but what I was leading to was a sort of comparison of Deleuze's, but still, one might ask, does Deleuze's virtual lead us only beyond the familiar prefixes of voids of non, or also beyond even the labyrinthine? Where does the work of Deleuze and Lyotard point to the prefix? I think it's just leave for us.
Okay, thank you.